So what we are currently seeing in the country is the result of years of increasing levels of poverty and increasing levels of inequality. And that is not to say that that is the only cause or the trigger. So what we have seen is that people in extremely poor households, in extremely poor areas, have become vulnerable to being manipulated by other interests in society who are using the level of poverty and insecurity and hunger, which is real, in order to drive particular agendas towards some kind of issues. That I don't know. I mean, and that the security institutions have to reveal who is behind it, but it is extremely coordinated, very well coordinated attack on the economic infrastructure of the country. But they would not have had the support of poor and vulnerable people if there was not the situation of deepening levels of poverty, deepening levels of hunger. We have a situation of about 43 million people of working age unemployed in South Africa. We have townships where the youth unemployment is running at about 70 to 80% of young people of working age. That is a recipe for conflict. And all it required was a spark to spark social unrest. And of course, that spark came in under the cover of the Free Zuma campaign, which was then very soon afterwards hijacked into other attacks on the economic system. So when you are around in KZN, in the big cities like Pietermaritzburg, Durban, Richards Bay, Empangeni, the basic food infrastructure has almost been destroyed. There are some malls that are still open, malls that have not been destroyed, but most of these are on shutdown. So actually there is a shortage of food as we speak in most of KZN. So we have seen over the past few days, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, various patterns are beginning to emerge. And from those, we can see that it is not only shops that are being looted, it's the entire supply logistics towards the store. So, as an example, there are a number of warehouses between Durban and Pietermaritzburg, not very close to communities, not within walking distance of any of the cities. And you suddenly see about 1,000 people in vehicles descending upon these warehouses, all at the same time. That is coordination. Not only are we seeing shops and warehouses, but we're also seeing the trucking industry. Yesterday, it seems there was a concerted effort to destroy trucks. And so in parts of, for instance, Pietermaritzburg, where there were a lot of trucks parked, they were put to light. And of course, trucks are required to transport goods from either producers or warehouses to retail stores. So without trucks, you cannot move the food from where the food is currently to where the food is needed. That too is an economic infrastructure that impacts directly on the food system. Then another area of the value chain of food that was specifically targeted was the sector that has to do with packaging. Now, you and I will both know that when products such as rice is imported or sugar, that it comes in massive containers but cannot be sold without packaging. We cannot buy milk without cartons. We cannot buy a bread without plastics. So when your packaging part of the value chain is specifically targeted, as it has been around Durban, then you are asking who has the intelligence, who has the knowledge of the food value system and know exactly what to target and where to target in order to make a maximum impact on food security in the country. Yes, I think that in order to understand what is currently happening, we have to keep a whole number of analytical strands together. So in one sense, yes, it is a food riot because those who accessed the food were essentially hungry people. People from low-income households who have been suffering poverty and unemployment for years. We know, for instance, that the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group Household Affordability Index for the month of June shows that a basket of 44 foods cost in the region of 4,000 Rand, or way above 4,000 Rand, while the national minimum wage for the month of June, if somebody worked, would have brought in an income of 3,642 Rand. That wage, which has to be dispersed through a household of 4 persons because of the level of unemployment, is not enough to purchase sufficient nutritious food. So there are hungry people walking around our country even before this unrest. That is true. And the fact that those people so-called looted and used the opportunity to access food where they otherwise don't have, that would characterize as a food riot. Yet at the same time, we also know that there were other forces at play creating the opportunity for this to happen, and their agenda is another agenda. So we cannot say, no, it was only looting connected to poverty, or no, it wasn't anything to do with poverty, it was criminal intent. No, actually, both are true. And if we are ever to resolve and find proper solutions, then we are going to, from an analytical point of view, hold both of these factors together and say both are true. So on the one hand, then how do we eradicate poverty and inequality? And on the hand, how do we secure our state? Because if it is only looting, then the answer to that is more policing. And then we dismiss the real situation of poverty and hunger, which has created the fertile ground for people to be exposed to these levels of manipulation. So it is in fact both. And we cannot police our way out of this. We can police our way out of criminality, but not out of poverty and inequality. For that, we require other policy interventions. So the first thing is, it is very clear that we have to acknowledge that poverty, unemployment, hunger, food insecurity, low wage trajectory that our economy has been on for generations, that provides a ground for people to rise up. And so that is what we have seen. And it seems to me that on the other hand, the criminal intent, which also facilitated part of this uprising, could have been forestalled through better intelligence. It seems to me very clearly that as citizens, we have to hold government accountable. We have to hold our security apparatus accountable. We also have to get answers as to why we saw what we have termed a strategic absence of law enforcement around certain parts of this unrest. And those are security questions. And as citizens, we need answers. However, it seems to me that we need action and we need a range of solutions. The first and the most immediate solution is that we must avert a looming hunger crisis. South Africans are by and large net buyers of food. So we purchase most of our food. And because we purchase most of our food, our retail sector is where we access our food. The retail sector has been hit very hard. The malls closest to informal settlements, closest to low-income households have been vandalized and totally destroyed. So we need to access. What do we do to change that? Number one, we need to secure our food logistics. We need to reopen the port of Durban. We need to secure our petrol flow between Durban and Johannesburg, which is cut at the moment. We need to secure the N3, which is the main route. We also need to secure the logistics industry, the trucks that are still available, and whether that happens through means of convoys guarded by the police in the air, police vans ahead of these convoys, behind these convoys. But we actually have to reconnect the supply lines. Without that, we will not be able to avert this looming hunger. And in order to connect the supply lines, we also need to give confidence to the business sector and the retail sector that they actually can reopen. And that requires visible policing, have the army securing these routes so that we can secure the supply lines. That's number one. Number two, the malls do not only serve as places where we buy and sell goods. The malls also provide various community level services. So I'm hearing constantly old age recipients of old age grants, recipients of child support grants are saying, are we going to get our next grant? Where will the grant be paid out? The place where it's paid out has been burnt down. And that is creating a number of stress and tension within low-income households. We need an answer, and we need an answer very soon around that. The third area that I would say is of immediate concern is when the food system reopens, we are likely to see spikes in the price of various foods because farmers have lost produce because they couldn't transport it. Trucks have been lost, malls have been vandalized. So we should expect spikes in prices. In addition to that, low-income households are going to have to travel further to purchase their food, which now means transport cost. It is imperative of the part of the state, I believe, to immediately reintroduce, at the very least, the social relief grant, because households are suffering and they will continue to suffer. And if we don't have answers on those three areas, we might very well see in the coming weeks a greater sense of food riots as people are rioting to get their hands on the little bit of food that is available. Then, of course, there are intermediate issues, there are long-term issues that require a major transformation of our economy, and an economy that really will tackle inequality and poverty. And it is our view that we need to move away from the dominant economic question. Over the last 20 years, we have asked ourselves the question, how do we create jobs? That has only led to interventions that have increased unemployment and increased poverty. We need to turn the question around and say, how do we create more demand? How do we bring more people into the market? And that will require a different set of policy interventions. And then we are talking possibly about a basic income grant that actually allow people to live beyond subsistence and to demand goods and services